Hercule Poirot, summoned by a letter stained with fear, steps into a web of whispers and shadows that stretch across centuries. A murdered noblewoman, a hidden will, and a legacy stained by blood. Join us for the affair at Linthill House, inspired by the real scandals of Scottish estates, crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor, though this tale is our own. Before we begin, share in the comments. Where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. If this tale captivates your imagination, consider supporting us through our membership program, which includes access to ad-free versions of all our stories and exclusive content, or leave us a tip. Every contribution helps keep these mysteries alive in the darkness. Now let the story unfold. Chapter 1. An Invitation to Eyemouth. There are few things Hercule Poirot enjoyed less than leisure for leisure's sake. While I have often dreamed of lazy days spent fishing or playing golf, my brilliant friend approached idleness with the same distaste one might reserve for lukewarm tea or an untidy tie. And yet there we were, sequestered in a modest inn near the Berwickshire coast. It was early spring, and the North Sea wind made walking a rather bracing ordeal, but Poirot insisted it was good for his système nerveux. He was wrapped, as always, in several layers of immaculately pressed clothing and a thick overcoat with a velvet collar. As for me, I found myself wishing for a third pair of socks. It was on our second morning there that the letter arrived. The innkeeper, a shy lad who addressed Poirot as Mr. Parrot, brought it to our breakfast table along with a rack of toast and a frown. The envelope bore a peculiar detail that caught my eye. A small water stain in the upper corner, as if it had been handled with wet fingers. Poirot opened the envelope with the daintiness of a surgeon. The stationery was thick, edged in silver, and bore a rather noble-looking crest, 2 rampant lions flanking a single sheaf of barley. But it was what Poirot noticed that made him pause. A faint impression in the paper, as if someone had written on a sheet above it with considerable pressure. "From Lady Frances Cavendish," he said softly, holding the paper to the light. "Of Linthill House. But observe, Hastings, she has written this letter twice. See here the ghost of different words beneath." He traced invisible letters with his finger. The first draft was more urgent, shall we say. "Surely not both at once," I said lightly, reaching for the marmalade. Poirot ignored my humor entirely. "You do not find it curious, mon ami, that a lady of the Scottish aristocracy writes not to invite me to speak, to lecture, or even to consult, but rather to attend her as a guest in a time of grave unease?" His eyes glittered with interest. "And look here, lest the past awaken and demand payment in blood. Ah, mon vieux, this is not a holiday, this is a summons, and someone has made her very afraid indeed." An hour later we were in a hired motorcar, driving along winding coastal roads toward Eyemouth. The cliffs loomed high, the sea below restless and grey. I had seldom seen such a dramatic landscape, nor one so clearly suited to tales of old crimes and restless ghosts. Linthill House soon rose before us, a grand manor, its sandstone facade streaked with ivy and age. It stood on a bluff above the sea, its windows narrow and tall like watchful eyes. The drive was lined with yew trees, and the air had that sharp coppery tang I've only ever noticed near places touched by history or death. But it was the grounds that first struck Poirot as odd. "Regard the gardens, Hastings, recently disturbed earth near the east wing. And see there, fresh gravel on the path, but only leading to one door. Someone has been expecting visitors, or perhaps hiding evidence of them." We were greeted at the great door by a woman I guessed to be in her late 50s. Lady Frances Cavendish had an air of restrained elegance, dressed in greys and silvers, as if she too had been pulled from a painting. Her manner was cool but courteous, and she offered her hand to Poirot without hesitation. But I noticed her gloves. Fine leather, but with a small tear at the thumb hastily mended. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice carrying just the faintest tremor, "you have come. I feared you might not." "Lady Frances," Poirot replied, bowing slightly. "Your letter. It intrigued me considerably, particularly the urgency that required you to write it twice." A flicker of surprise crossed her features, so brief I might have missed it. "I wanted to be precise in my words." She led us into the drawing room. The ceilings were high, the wallpaper of faded damask, and the windows framed the churning sea below. A fire crackled, but the air still carried a slight dampness, as if the house had been too long without warmth. On the mantelpiece sat 4 silver-framed photographs and 1 painted portrait, but the portrait's frame was turned face down. "Tell me, madame," Poirot said once tea had been served, "what troubles you so deeply?" Lady Frances looked at him for a long moment. Her fingers trembled slightly as she set down her teacup, but not from nerves, I realized. There was a small bandage on her index finger, barely visible beneath her glove. "3 days ago," she said finally, "I received this." She reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "It was slipped under my door during the night." Poirot examined the note carefully. In block letters someone had written, "The truth will come out. Justice for Lady Margaret. You have 7 days." "Disturbing," Poirot murmured. "And this prompted your letter to me?" "That and other things. You see, Monsieur Poirot, Lady Margaret Hume, a distant relation of mine, died in this house. On the 13th of August, 1751, she was murdered." I straightened slightly. This was more than idle superstition. "She was found at the foot of the main staircase," Lady Frances continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "A noblewoman of great means. She had recently changed her will. That very day, in fact. They said she tripped. But before she died, she told the maid, 'He did this to me. The 13th step remembers.' And nothing more." Poirot's eyes sharpened like a blade. "The 13th step, an unusual detail to remember in one's dying moments, non? She was slipping into death, perhaps she was delirious. Perhaps, or perhaps she was leaving a message for those with the wit to understand it." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, madame, how many steps are there on your main staircase?" Frances hesitated. 15. There have always been 15. "Hilors, how can you be so certain it was murder?" Frances's expression turned grave. She rose and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "Because now, Monsieur Poirot, someone else is in danger. The note was not the first sign. Strange whispers in the night, locked doors found open, portraits turned to the wall." She gestured almost unconsciously toward the mantelpiece. "And last week, one of the staff was found outside in the night. No memory of how she got there, her hand bleeding as if from a defensive wound, just like mine." She pulled off her glove, revealing a deeper cut than the small bandage had suggested. "This happened 2 nights ago. I was walking the corridors, unable to sleep, when I heard voices, hushed, urgent. I followed the sound to the north wing, but when I tried to listen at the door, something struck it from the other side. A piece of the old stonework fell and caught my hand." "Bon Dieu," murmured Poirot. "But why call me? Why not the local authorities? What makes you believe this is connected to events from centuries past?" Lady Frances turned from the window, her face pale in the firelight. "Because I believe the one who killed Margaret walks among us still, or their blood does. And I fear history is preparing to repeat itself. Someone has been searching the house, Monsieur Poirot, searching for something that was hidden long ago. The note proves they're close to finding it." There was a silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. Then Poirot stood, dusting an invisible speck from his sleeve. "Madame," It would be my honor to investigate this matter. But first, may I see the portrait? Francis stiffened. It's nothing of importance, an old family portrait. Ah, but in my experience, madame, it is precisely the nothing that proves to be everything. Reluctantly, she turned the frame. The painted portrait showed a young woman in 18th century dress, standing beside the very staircase where Lady Margaret had died. But it was the woman's face that caught my attention. There was something hauntingly familiar about her features, though I could not place why. Who is she? Poirot asked quietly. Margaret's ward, Eliza Grant. The portrait was painted just before she disappeared. As we were shown to our rooms, I could not help but glance up the grand staircase, the same one, I realized with a shiver, where Lady Margaret Hume had met her end all those years ago. Poirot paused at the 13th step, running his fingers along the edge. Curious, Hastings. This step has been replaced. The wood is newer, the grain different. Someone wanted to erase whatever the 13th step remembered. And somewhere I felt sure a secret still lingered in the walls of Linthill House. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Panelling. It was shortly after luncheon that Poirot began to make his customary inquiries. He had a way of drifting through a household, seemingly idle, yet absorbing every detail with those keen grey eyes of his. I followed behind like an obedient retriever, occasionally throwing in a remark or a question, which Poirot would sometimes praise and more often ignore entirely. We started with Lady Frances herself. She led us to the library, a long, dim room heavy with the scent of beeswax and centuries-old vellum. The windows were shuttered against the wind, and the fire sputtered as if unwilling to give up its warmth. But Poirot's attention was immediately drawn to the desk, specifically to the blotter, which showed the mirror image of recent writing. "There are things in this house that do not sleep," Lady Frances said, settling into a high-backed chair. Her hands gripped the armrests tightly. "Sometimes I hear footsteps in the hall at night, soft, like someone walking barefoot. And things move. A candlestick left on the table ends up on the floor. But it isn't ghosts I fear, Monsieur Poirot." "Non?" Poirot replied, twirling one of his immaculate moustaches while discreetly examining the blotter. "Then what? Pray tell." "Memories," she said, her voice barely audible, "and blood." With that she handed him a small bundle, tied in black ribbon and scented faintly of lavender. Inside was a sheaf of yellowed papers, fragments of a diary. But Poirot noticed something else. The ribbon was new, recently purchased, though the papers were ancient. "This belonged to Dr. Alistair Forbes, her physician," Lady Frances explained. "It was found tucked away among his personal effects, discovered years later by a distant relative. Most of it is mundane medical notes, but the final entries, they chill the blood." Poirot laid the papers on the desk and we read together. But first he held up one page to the light. "Interesting. This page has been carefully steamed and reattached. Someone has read this very recently, and with great care not to damage it." Excerpts from the private journal of Dr. Alistair Forbes, 1751. 5 August. Lady Margaret Hume holds Linthill now. A fine mind, a cold manner. Her brother Andrew returned from France thin and sunken-eyed, speaking of liberty and Jacobite glory. But he is reckless. Their father changed his will after the '45 uprising. Margaret inherits all not entailed. Andrew flies into rages. He says it is theft. She says it is justice. I fear where this quarrel may lead. Margaret has taken to carrying a small silver key on the chain about her neck. She says it opens what must never be closed. 8 August. Margaret calls me in secret. She has drawn up a new will, naming her ward Miss Eliza Grant of Leith as heir. She says Andrew will destroy Linthill for spite. I warn her, Do not delay filing it. She says she waits for courage. The key, she tells me, will ensure that truth survives even if she does not. Look where the light does not reach, she said. She has given a duplicate key to her most trusted servant, old Thomas the coachman, with instructions to see it reaches Eliza should anything happen. 13 August. Lady Margaret is dead. The silver key is gone from her neck. Andrew took it as she lay dying, but he does not know of the duplicate. Thomas has already spirited young Eliza away to safety, along with the key and certain letters. Andrew claims she fell, but I examined the body. The wound to her head, it came from above, not below. Someone struck her as she climbed the stairs, then pushed her down to make it appear an accident. I dare not speak this aloud, for Andrew has threatened my family. But I write it here in the hope that someday justice will find its voice. I shivered. That's awfully convenient, isn't it? A new will drawn up, and she's dead before it can be lodged. Poirot nodded gravely, but his eyes were fixed on the blotter and the brother. This Andrew Hume, what became of him? Lady Frances stood and moved to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Gone. Disappeared the night of her death. Some said he fled to the continent. Others claimed he drowned in the Eyemouth tide. His body was never found. Neither was the new will. But the key? She hesitated. There are rumors he fathered a child in France before returning, a bastard son who took the Hume name to escape his debts. She turned back to us, her face etched with worry. But I think the will still exists. And someone, perhaps someone descended from that bastard line, does not wish it to be found. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Aha, a motive, n'est-ce pas? If the estate was wrongly inherited, and now a new generation fears exposure. He paused, studying the blotter more intently. Tell me, madame, have you been corresponding with anyone about this matter? Recently? Frances's composure faltered for just a moment. No. Only with you, of course. But Poirot had already deciphered the mirror writing on the blotter. I caught a glimpse of what he saw, fragments of letters, including the words, "must be stopped," and "before she realizes." Later that afternoon we were taken on a tour of the house by the butler, Mr. MacLeod, a tall, weathered man with a face like old oak, and a manner as still as a churchyard. As we walked, I noticed his eyes constantly scanning the shadows, as if expecting something to emerge. But more tellingly, he carried a ring of keys that included one small silver key that looked far older than the others. He showed us the staircase where Lady Margaret had died. It was a sweeping oak structure, with worn steps and a heavy iron balustrade. Poirot paused near the 13th step, the one that had been replaced. There, monsieur, MacLeod said, his voice dropping to a whisper. That's where she was found, lying awkward-like, her head against the newel post. Poirot crouched and examined the edge of the stair with his magnifying glass. He studied the 13th step carefully, then examined the area around it. Curious, he said softly. What is? I asked. He gestured to a slight dip in the wood of the 13th step. A groove here, almost as if something heavy had scraped or fallen, not a foot but a sharp edge, like a cane or a weapon. Then he examined the area near the step. The butler cleared his throat nervously. She was supposed to have fallen, slipped. That's what the family said. And yet, Poirot murmured, she spoke before she died. He did this to me. The 13th step remembers. She did not say how. She did not say why, but she knew. And she left instructions. He looked up at MacLeod. Tell me, have you ever seen a small silver key? One that might unlock secrets? MacLeod's hand instinctively moved to his keyring, then stopped. No, monsieur. No such key exists here. But Poirot had already noticed the gesture. Tell me, MacLeod, have any of the current residents ever claimed descent from Andrew Hume? The butler stiffened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the banister. No, monsieur. He was a traitor. A disgrace. The Humes would not admit his blood if it ran redder than rubies. Though he hesitated. There are whispers about a man who came here some years back claiming kinship, but his papers were questionable. Poirot said nothing more, but I could tell his mind was racing ahead of us both. That evening, as we prepared for dinner, Poirot requested a private word with MacLeod. They spoke in hushed tones near the servants' stair, and I caught only fragments. 40 years in this house. And things the family would rather forget. And most intriguingly, one of my ancestors served Lady Margaret. He saved what he could. When Poirot rejoined me, his expression was thoughtful. The butler knows more than he admits, Hastings. But fear keeps his tongue still. However, he has confirmed something most interesting. There was indeed a duplicate silver key, and someone in this house may know precisely where it is. That night, as we returned to our rooms, the wind howled against the stone walls. Somewhere in the house I thought I heard the creak of a door opening slowly, and the faint sound of footsteps on the stairs, pausing near the 13th step. Poirot stood at the window, silhouetted in the pale light of the moon. "She was clever, Hastings," he said quietly. "Who?" "Margaret." "We." "She knew she was in danger. She hid her papers. She tried to change her will. She may even have left us a trail to follow. The butler is not telling all he knows. And Lady Frances. She has not told us everything either. That correspondence on her blotter, she has been writing to someone about this matter, someone she fears. Do you believe there's a connection to the present?" Poirot turned from the window, eyes like polished steel. "But of course, mon ami, someone has waited too long to bury the past, and now the past has risen from the grave. Tomorrow we shall discover what secrets the 13th step truly remembers." Chapter 3. Shadows of the Living. I awoke the next morning to find Poirot already dressed and perched by the window, sipping tea with an expression of deep contemplation. In his hand was a small object that caught the morning light, a brass rubbing he had made of markings near the 13th step. "I have made several observations, mon ami," he said quietly. "And now I would like to make several introductions. But first, observe this." He held up the rubbing. "These markings have been examined recently. There are fresh scratches around the edges where someone has tried to sand or scrape away the evidence. Someone has been trying to erase what the 13th step remembers. It was after breakfast that Lady Frances arranged for us to meet the current household. A small group, but curiously diverse. She did so in the drawing-room, standing like a duchess receiving foreign dignitaries, though her smile wavered more than once. "I have asked those closest to Linthill to be available," she said. "You may find them more or less helpful, I'm sure." Poirot bowed graciously. "It is not for them to be helpful, madame. It is only for me to notice what they choose to reveal." Mr. Ian Hunker entered first, and I immediately understood why Lady Frances might have concerns. Tall, wiry, and prematurely grey at the temples, he bore himself with the effortless arrogance of a man born to land and title. His handshake was firm, but his eyes darted, calculating, measuring. Most tellingly, he wore a signet ring that bore the Hume crest, but Poirot's sharp eyes caught something I missed. "You're not here for the ghost stories, I take it," he said with a thin smile. "No," said Poirot mildly. "Ghosts do not usually tamper with legal documents." Ian raised an eyebrow, and I caught a flash of something. Surprise, fear. "You mean the will? That old rumor? You do not believe it exists?" He smiled more broadly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, it may have existed once, but these walls have devoured stranger things, I assure you." His fingers drummed against his thigh. A nervous habit, I thought. But Poirot was watching his hands with particular interest. Your ring, monsieur, it is most beautiful. A family heirloom sans doute? Ian's drumming stopped abruptly. Yes, passed down through generations. Curious. The engraving appears quite fresh, and the gold, it has not the patina of age one would expect from such an ancient piece. Poirot's voice carried a note of casual observation. I once investigated a case involving forged heirlooms. The techniques are quite sophisticated these days, but the eye of experience can usually detect the deception. Poirot did not inquire further, but I noted the way his fingers tapped the chair arm, counting beats, and how Yane's face had gone pale. Miss Eliza Drummond came next. We had first encountered her upon our arrival at Linthill, and I remember being struck by how much younger she was than I had anticipated, likely in her late 20s, with a brisk, efficient manner and a keen, watchful eye. Even now, as Lady Frances's companion and secretary, she held a notepad, occasionally jotting down observations as we spoke. Yet there was something more, a certain assurance in her bearing, a familiarity with the house that seemed to run deeper than her official role suggested. Most intriguing of all was the small locket she wore, which she touched almost unconsciously, as if seeking reassurance from its presence. I understand you have an interest in the estate's history, she asked Poirot without pleasantries. It is the story of Lady Margaret Hume that draws me, he replied. A woman who dared to defy her time. Eliza's eyes brightened with genuine passion. She was remarkable. She hosted Enlightenment thinkers at Linthill. Some say she even corresponded with David Hume. She believed in education for women, in justice over tradition. She once wrote that truth has a way of surfacing like oil on water. It cannot be kept down forever. No relation, muttered Ian behind her. But I noticed how Eliza's jaw tightened at his words, and how her hand moved protectively to her locket. Poirot tilted his head. And do you, mademoiselle, believe she was murdered? I believe she knew she would be, Eliza replied without hesitation. Her voice carried a weight that seemed intensely personal. Women like her always know, and they are rarely wrong. She would have prepared for it. Left signs, clues, a trail for those who came after. You speak as though you knew her personally. Eliza's hand stilled on her locket. I've studied her extensively. Her letters, her writings. Sometimes I feel as though I do know her. My family. We've always been drawn to stories of injustice. Perhaps it's in our blood. I confess I found her rather intense but also oddly compelling, and Poirot was studying her with the same fascination he usually reserved for particularly complex puzzles. The third guest was Mr. Alan Grant, recently arrived from Berwick as the new gardener. He was quiet and modest, with rough hands and a lowland accent. When introduced, he seemed almost embarrassed to be included in such company. But I noticed how his eyes kept drifting to Miss Drummond, and how she seemed to avoid looking at him directly. I'm something of a distant connection to the Humes, he admitted, through my grandmother's line, though that means little now. Poirot's expression sharpened almost imperceptibly. Grant. An interesting name indeed. Tell me, monsieur, what brought you to Linthill specifically? Alan shifted uncomfortably. The position was advertised, good wages, and... He hesitated. My grandmother always spoke of this place. Said our family had ties here long ago. She used to tell stories about a lady who was wronged, and how someday the truth would come out. I suppose I was curious. And what do you make of Linthill, monsieur? Alan shrugged, glancing around the room. Soil's good. Wind's harsh. The house. He hesitated, his weathered face troubled. Feels wrong sometimes. Wrong in what way? Alan looked embarrassed. Heavy. Like it's waiting for something. My gran used to say some places hold on to their secrets too tight. Makes the air thick. She also said, He stopped, looking around nervously. "Please continue," Poirot encouraged gently. "She said the Grants never forgot. That someday what was stolen would be returned. I never knew what she meant, but being here—" He shrugged. "Maybe I'm beginning to understand." Poirot nodded slowly. "Perhaps you are indeed." After the introductions, I noticed how the three guests interacted, or rather how they avoided each other. Ian dominated conversations with casual authority, but I saw how both Eliza and Alan grew quiet when he spoke. There was tension there, old and deep. But more intriguingly, I caught Eliza and Alan exchanging a brief glance, not of strangers, but of people who shared a secret. That afternoon, Poirot requested to see the family archive in the West Wing. Lady Frances led us herself, though she seemed reluctant to do so. The archive room was a narrow stone-walled chamber, filled with dusty trunks and locked cabinets. There was a lingering scent of damp vellum and old fire smoke. "We don't come here often," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Too many memories." But Poirot's attention was immediately drawn to signs of recent disturbance, dust patterns that showed someone had been through these documents. Poirot began with the Hume genealogies. He traced the family tree with a magnifying glass, his eyes dancing across the parchment. "Tiens," he murmured. "Here is Andrew Hume, and here, crossed out in later ink, is a child born to him in France. No name, only issue uncertain. But look here, Hastings. Someone has tried to erase this entry entirely. The ink is scraped away, but not completely." Lady Frances frowned. "I thought he died abroad, unmarried." "Perhaps," said Poirot. "Or perhaps that was the story told to erase him from history. But see here in the margin, in different ink, someone has written A.H. to E.G. 1752. A correspondence, perhaps. From Andrew Hume to Eliza Grant." He moved to the second trunk, unlocking it with a long, delicate key provided by Francis. Inside were ledgers, letters, and a single oil portrait of a dark-haired woman in a green gown, severe of face, proud of posture. "Lady Margaret," Francis whispered. Poirot studied it intently. "Regard her eyes, Hastings. That is not a face one forgets easily. She looks directly at us, as though she still waits to be heard." I glanced around. The air in the archive seemed to have thickened, and I found myself thinking of Alan Grant's words about places that held their secrets too tight. Poirot held up one final item. A faded note, written in a feminine hand. The paper was water-stained, but legible. "If anything befalls me, know that the true will is not lost, but hidden. Trust no one bearing the Hume name, not even my own blood. Look where the light does not reach. The 13th step remembers all. E.G. holds the key to all. M." He folded the note carefully. "This note has been handled recently. The edges are worn from frequent reading. Someone has been studying Lady Margaret's final message very carefully indeed." "It is as I suspected," Poirot said. "The past is not sleeping. It is only misplaced. And someone in this house knows exactly where to find it." That evening we dined with the household. The conversation was stilted, full of careful pleasantries, but I watched the undercurrents. Ian spoke of his plans for modernizing the estate, while Eliza grew increasingly quiet. Alan said little, but I noticed how his eyes followed every word, and how he seemed to be memorizing the layout of the house. But it was during the soup course that Poirot made his most telling observation. "Mademoiselle Drummond," he said casually, "your locket is most charming. A family piece, I presume?" Eliza's hand flew to her throat. "Yes, it belonged to my grandmother." "May I?" Poirot asked, extending his hand with perfect courtesy. Reluctantly, Eliza removed the locket and handed it to him. Poirot examined it with his magnifying glass, then opened it with a small click. Inside was a miniature portrait, And a tiny silver key. The room fell silent. "How curious," Poirot murmured. "This key appears to be quite old indeed, and the portrait." He held it to the light. "It bears a remarkable resemblance to Lady Margaret Hume." Eliza's face had gone white. I don't know anything about that. It's just an old family piece." But Poirot was already rising from his chair. "I believe, mes amis, that it is time we discovered what secrets the 13th step truly holds." Later, Poirot asked for a fire to be lit in the blue parlor, a rarely used room on the south side of the house. We sat by the crackling hearth as wind rattled the windows, and Poirot laid out his thoughts. "There are 4 points of interest," he said, steepling his fingers. 1. Lady Margaret was murdered after changing her will. 2. The will vanished, but she left clues, very specific clues. 3. At least one person in this house today may descend from Andrew Hume, but not the person we might expect. And 4. Someone does not want that will found, but someone else has been searching for it most diligently. "Do you suspect Ian?" I asked. Poirot steepled his fingers. "His ring is a fake, Hastings. Recently made to support a false claim. He is desperate, but he is not our primary concern. Miss Drummond, however, is fascinating. She carries the key Lady Margaret died to protect, and her knowledge of Lady Margaret is not academic. It is personal. Inherited." "And Alan Grant?" Poirot's brow furrowed. "His name echoes the past most significantly. Grant, the same surname as Lady Margaret's intended heir, and his arrival here is not coincidental. I suspect he and Miss Drummond are not strangers to each other. They are allies, perhaps the last descendants of those who knew the truth." He leaned closer. "We are on the brink of revelation, Hastings. But first, we must answer the question Lady Margaret left for us. What does the 13th step truly remember? And I believe Miss Drummond's key will provide the answer." The fire crackled low. In the silence that followed, I thought I heard the floorboards above us creak, just once, as though someone had been listening and moved away. But this time I was certain I heard the soft click of a key turning in a lock. Are you captivated by the mysteries of nocturnal tales? Join our exclusive membership community and unlock a world of additional intrigue. For just $2.99 a month, become a supporter and enjoy ad-free versions of all our stories, priority replies to your comments, and access to members-only polls where you help shape our content. Step up to our Extra Stories tier at $9.99 monthly for early access to new episodes, member shoutouts, plus 2 bonus mysteries each month that you won't find anywhere else. And for our most devoted mystery lovers, the Collector's tier at $24.99 includes quarterly ebooks featuring your favorite cases. Plus, our first exclusive members-only episode, The Ashworth Hall Phantom, is now available. A chilling tale crafted especially for our community. Your membership keeps these mysteries alive and brings you deeper into the shadows we explore together. Join now through the link in our description and let the exclusive mysteries begin. Now back to our tale. Chapter 4: The Stare That Whispers. The following morning dawned grey and close, as though the very sky had forgotten how to breathe. Linthill House loomed over the coastal plain, silent and grim beneath a wash of dull cloud. I found Poirot in the breakfast room, but he was not eating. Instead, he was examining the silver key from Eliza's locket under his magnifying glass. "Mon ami," he said, "today we go hunting in the dark, but first we must understand what we hunt." "In the dark," I repeated, buttering toast. Poirot lifted one perfectly arched eyebrow. "We must look where the light does not reach. It is what Lady Margaret asked of us, n'est-ce pas? But observe this key, Hastings. It has been used recently, very recently." There are fresh scratches on the metal and traces of wood dust in the grooves. Someone opened a lock with this key in the past few days. I was about to press him further when we were interrupted by Miss Drummond, who entered in a state of visible agitation. She clutched a sheaf of papers and lowered her voice. "There's been an incident in the north wing. A terrible accident. The old sconce fell and nearly struck me last night. I was exploring the disused corridors, searching through Lady Margaret's papers for clues about her final message when it happened. If I hadn't stepped aside at the last moment..." Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, and I noticed dark circles under her eyes, as if she hadn't slept. It felt almost deliberate, though I'm sure that's just my nerves. The house has such a strange atmosphere. But more tellingly, she kept glancing at Poirot's hands, where he still held her key. "My locket," she said quietly. "Might I have it back?" Poirot stood at once. "Presently, mademoiselle. First, let us investigate this incident you mention." The north wing of Linthill had long been disused, a half-abandoned corridor of shuttered rooms and neglected furniture. Lady Frances met us outside the door of the old solar, looking pale and drawn, but with a barely concealed tension in her manner. "Iron says it was merely a draught," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "But I heard it myself from my room in the east wing, whispering, like someone murmuring in the stairwell just before I heard the crash. When I came to investigate this morning, I found poor Miss Drummond in her room quite shaken. Her eyes darted nervously between Eliza and the debris. She gestured toward a heavy iron wall sconce that now lay shattered on the stone floor, twisted and blackened at the base. The metal showed signs of age and wear, but the timing of its fall seemed oddly coincidental. The sconce had been hanging near a narrow spiral stair that wound up toward the attic, a staircase that had been forgotten by most of the household for decades. It was carved from worn grey stone, uneven and treacherous, partially concealed by shadows and neglect. Something about it set my nerves on edge. "This staircase," Eliza continued, "I discovered it weeks ago while researching the house's history. I found references to it in Lady Margaret's letters. She called it the path where light does not reach. I've been exploring it carefully, searching for what she hid." "How extraordinary that you found it," Poirot murmured, examining the staircase opening. "It has been forgotten by the household, hidden in plain sight by shadows and disuse." "I had no idea Miss Drummond had been using it," Lady Frances said quickly, though her voice carried a note of falseness. "The north wing has been sealed off for so long, we pay little attention to its forgotten corners." But Poirot's attention was immediately drawn to something else. Fresh footprints in the dust, leading both up and down the stairs. Multiple sets, and recent. Poirot examined the base of the sconce with his magnifying glass, then the stair. It did not fall on its own. The fixings were loosened. See here, the metal is scored deliberately. This was no accident, mademoiselle. Someone wanted you harmed. The timing is too convenient. You discover this staircase, begin your search, and suddenly a heavy sconce falls precisely where you would be standing. And the whispering, not the wind. Not if two people heard it distinctly. But observe, Hastings, these footprints. At least 3 different people have used this stair in the past day. And see here. He pointed to a small smear on the stone. Candle wax. Someone was carrying a light. Lady Frances's face had gone ashen. "You cannot possibly suggest—" "I suggest nothing yet, madame, but I observe everything." He paused, looking up the narrow stairwell in the north wing. "I should like to go up. But first, Miss Drummond, I believe this key belongs to something up there, does it not?" Eliza's face went white. I don't know what you mean." "Come now, mademoiselle, you have been up these stairs before, recently. The dust on your shoes matches the dust here precisely, and you have a small tear in your dress that matches the rough stone of this stairwell. You have been searching for something, and someone has been watching your every move, planning to stop you permanently. Lady Frances blanched. "There's nothing up there but dust and birds, surely." "Precisely," Poirot said with satisfaction. "The perfect place to hide something valuable, and the perfect place to stage an accident for someone who gets too close to the truth." He led the way, slowly, carefully, his patent leather shoes barely whispering on the stone. I followed, less elegantly, while Miss Drummond held a lantern aloft from the base. The stair was treacherous, worn smooth by centuries of use, and I found myself gripping the rough stone walls for balance. Halfway up, Poirot paused, running his fingers along the inner wall. But this time he was looking for something specific. "There is a seam here," he murmured. "A crack in the stone. No, in the wood. Hastings, bring your light closer." I held the lantern up, and as I did, something caught the glint, a faint outline in the paneling, barely visible unless the light struck it just so. But instead of pressing on it immediately, Poirot turned to Miss Drummond. "The key, mademoiselle. I believe it is time for the truth." With trembling hands, Eliza handed him the silver key. Poirot pressed against the concealed panel in the carved decoration, and with a soft click and a gentle creak, a narrow door swung inward, revealing a hollow chamber built into the wall itself. Inside, a small wooden box sat waiting, and the silver key fit perfectly into its tiny lock. Dust swirled. The smell was musty and old earth, paper, and something faintly metallic. Inside the box, propped against the inner stone, lay two bundles. The first was wrapped in oilcloth, the second in silk. Poirot removed them reverently. The first bundle contained a stack of documents, yellowed with age, bound in red ribbon. Atop them lay a smaller envelope, addressed in the same spidery script we'd seen in the archive, to be opened only if the truth be buried with me. Margaret Hume. But it was the second bundle that made me gasp. Inside were letters, dozens of them, in two different hands, the correspondence between Lady Margaret and her ward, Eliza Grant, spanning several years. Poirot opened Lady Margaret's final letter slowly. Inside was a signed, witnessed copy of Lady Margaret's final will, but also something more, a detailed confession. If you are reading this, then Andrew has succeeded in his murderous intent. But I have not died in vain, if the truth survives. My ward, Eliza Grant, is not merely my heir by choice, she is my heir by blood. My daughter, born in secret and raised in safety, away from Andrew's jealous rage. The estate is hers by right of birth as well as by my will. I have hidden these documents where only she or her descendants might find them, for I have given her the key and the knowledge to seek the truth. Let justice be done, though the heavens fall. Margaret Hume. He read it quickly, then handed it to me. My eyes scanned the names, and stopped on one crucial detail. "Eliza Grant," I said. "My great-great-great-grandmother," said a voice behind us. We turned. Miss Drummond stood at the foot of the stair, looking up with wide, unreadable eyes. Her face was pale, but there was something else there. Relief, perhaps, or resignation. And beside her stood Alan Grant. "I found the family letters years ago," she said quietly. "Hidden in my grandmother's effects after she died. They told the story, how Lady Margaret's daughter was spirited away by the coachman Thomas, how the truth was hidden, how the estate was stolen. When I came here as secretary, I hoped to find proof. I discovered this staircase by following Lady Margaret's clues in her correspondence. I've been searching for weeks, but I had to be careful. I suspected Lady Frances knew our true identities. Together," Alan added, his voice steady, "we're cousins, distant. Eliza Grant was our ancestor. We've been working together for months, but we had to be secretive about our search. We knew someone was watching us." Poirot nodded gravely. So Lady Margaret did indeed leave her estate to a woman, her own daughter, and the Hume line, through Andrew, was cut out entirely because he was a murderer. He glanced down the stairwell. Which means if someone descended from Andrew Hume believes they still have a claim, they would have a very strong motive to keep this will hidden. But more than that, they would have motive to eliminate anyone who might expose the truth. The loosened sconce was no accident, mes amis. It was attempted murder. As we made our way back down the treacherous stair, I noticed how Miss Drummond, or should I say Miss Grant, moved with complete familiarity, as if she had climbed these steps many times before. Back in the drawing room, Poirot laid the documents on the table. The firelight flickered on the ribbon, red as blood. "I believe we now understand why Lady Margaret died," he said. "And why her final words, 'He did this to me.' The 13th step, remembers, were not merely accusation, but instruction. She was telling us where to look for the truth." He turned to Lady Frances, who had grown increasingly agitated as the implications became clear. "But more importantly, madam, we now understand why someone tried to kill Miss Drummond last night. Someone who knew she was close to finding this evidence. Someone who has been watching her every move and planning to stop her permanently." Frances's face stiffened. "I don't understand what you're implying." "Don't you?" The sconce was deliberately loosened. "The whispering you claimed to hear was you and your accomplice planning this attempt on Miss Drummond's life. You asked me to uncover the truth. Now I ask you, has Ian ever provided clear proof of his descent? His paternity?" Frances's composure began to crack. "It was always assumed he bears the name, the features." "Assumption," Poirot said coldly, "is a dangerous habit. Particularly when it supports a lie that has lasted nearly 3 centuries. There was a sudden noise in the corridor. The door swung open, and Mr. Ian Hume Kerr entered. His usual composure was cracked, his hair disheveled, his clothes hastily thrown on. In his hand, he carried a heavy walking stick. He looked down at the documents, then at each of us in turn. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, calculation, and finally, something like desperation. "What have you found?" he asked, his voice too carefully controlled. Poirot's moustache twitched. "A stare that whispers secrets, a legacy not your own, and a murderer's bloodline that ends with you." But it was the walking stick that caught my attention, and the way Ian gripped it, as if it were a weapon. The same kind of weapon that might have left a groove in the 13th step all those years ago. Chapter 5: The Legacy of Shadows. The drawing room was utterly silent. The flames in the hearth crackled with theatrical timing as Ian Hume Kerr stood before us, his face shadowed in firelight, eyes flickering over the will on the table. The walking stick in his hand seemed to tremble slightly. "So," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous, "you've found it at last." Poirot did not move from his position by the fireplace. "Found is such a simple word, monsieur. But the truth is rarely so simple. Lady Margaret died to protect this, and someone, perhaps many someones, benefited from its absence." Ian's gaze sharpened, and I saw his hands clench around the walking stick. "Are you accusing me of something, Poirot?" "I accuse no one," Poirot said with perfect mildness, "until the facts demand it most emphatically." He turned then slowly toward Miss Drummond, still seated, still silent, her expression unreadable but her posture straighter than I had ever seen it. "Eliza," he said softly. "Miss Drummond, if that is indeed your name, I wonder, how long have you known what you truly possessed?" She met his gaze steadily. "I told you. I found the family letters, years ago." But you told no one." "I didn't know where the will was. Not until recently." "Ah, non. But you knew it existed. You knew it changed everything." Poirot stepped closer, his voice taking on that particular intensity he reserved for crucial moments. "And yet you remained here, loyal, observant, not once pressing your claim. Why? Lady Frances stiffened in her chair. Surely you're not suggesting— No, said Poirot, raising a hand with theatrical precision. I do not suggest. I observe. And what I observe is most illuminating indeed. And then he turned back to the hearth, as though speaking to the flames themselves. The simplest path would be this: Yin, ambitious and prideful, learns of the lost will. He fears exposure. He seeks to destroy it. Perhaps even misleads Francis into believing he is the last rightful heir. He turned sharply, his grey eyes glittering like steel. But that is not the path we are on. I confess I felt lost at this point. Then what path are we on? Poirot's gaze swept the room, taking in each face in turn with the precision of a master painter studying his subjects. The path of silence and shadows and sacrifice, but also, mon ami, the path of justice delayed, not denied. He stepped forward and gestured to the documents spread across the table. May I present to you evidence of a conspiracy? Not to hide the truth, but to reveal it safely. Miss Drummond and Mr. Grant have been working together, but not alone. All eyes turned to the butler, MacLeod, who had entered silently and now stood in the doorway like a sentinel. 40 years I've served this house, MacLeod said quietly, his weathered voice carrying the weight of decades. 40 years I've known the truth. My great-great-grandfather was Lady Margaret's coachman. Thomas, the one who saved young Eliza Grant. He saw Andrew Hume leave the house that night, blood on his hands and murder in his eyes. But who would believe a servant's word against a lord's? Poirot nodded approvingly. So you waited. You watched. You preserved what evidence you could. And when Miss Drummond arrived, you recognized not just her name, but her face. The resemblance to Lady Margaret is unmistakable once one knows what to look for. But there is more. Poirot continued, his voice growing harder, more relentless. You were not merely waiting for justice. You were protecting the truth from those who would destroy it. Because someone else knew the secret, n'est-ce pas? He turned to Lady Frances, whose face had gone ashen as parchment. Madame, you called me here not to uncover the past, but to control it. You knew who Miss Drummond really was. You had known for some time. And you feared that if the truth came out, your family's hold on Linthill would be revealed as the fraud it has always been. Francis's composure finally cracked like ice in spring. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Poirot said with cold precision. Your family has lived on stolen inheritance for nearly 3 centuries. When Eliza arrived as a secretary, you recognized the name, did you not? You researched her background. You discovered her true identity. And then you faced a choice: expose her and lose everything, or find another way. What other way? I asked, though I was beginning to see the terrible shape of it. Poirot's eyes were like polished steel. Murder, mon ami. Just as Andrew Hume murdered his sister, all the with perfect tragic precision. Lady Frances stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor like fingernails on slate. That's not— I never— The loosened sconce. Poirot continued relentlessly, each word falling like a hammer blow. The accidents you described, the staff member found bleeding in the night. You have been creating an atmosphere of danger, of supernatural threat, to mask your real intentions. You planned to kill Miss Drummond and make it appear as though the curse of Linthill had claimed another victim. No, Frances cried, her voice breaking. I only wanted— You wanted to preserve your comfortable lie, Poirot said with devastating finality. But you made one crucial error. You assumed that I would help you eliminate the threat, rather than uncover the truth. The correspondence on your blotter gave you away. You have been writing to someone, seeking advice on how to handle this problem. Someone who shares your desperation. He turned to Ian, whose face had gone from pale to flushed with rage and desperation. "You, monsieur, are not even a real Hume. Your ancestor was indeed a bastard son who took the name to escape debts in Glasgow, but not Andrew's bastard. Simply a common criminal who stole a noble name. You have no more claim to this place than the gardener. But you have been living the lie so long you began to believe it yourself." The revelation hit Ian like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face cycling through shock, rage, and finally, a kind of broken understanding. "All these years," he whispered, his voice hollow as an empty tomb, "all these years I thought—" "You thought what you were told to think," Poirot said, not unkindly. "Just as Lady Frances thought she could manipulate the truth to serve her purposes. But when Miss Drummond began her search, when she and Mr. Grant started getting close to the truth, you both panicked." He gestured to the walking stick still clutched in Yane's white-knuckled hand. "That stick, monsieur. It is not merely decorative, is it? It belonged to your supposed ancestor. Or so you believed. But observe the head of it. It bears scratches that match the groove in the 13th step. You have been carrying the murder weapon, thinking it a symbol of your heritage." Ian looked down at the stick in horror, as if seeing it for the first time. "But the final proof," Poirot said, "is this." He gestured to Lady Frances's gloves. "That tear in your glove, madame. It matches perfectly with metal filings I observed on the loosened sconce. The sharp edge caught your glove as you worked to weaken the fixings." Frances collapsed into her chair, all fight gone out of her like air from a punctured balloon. "I never meant for anyone to die. I couldn't bear to lose everything. This house, this life, it's all I've ever known." "And yet," said Eliza quietly, speaking for the first time since her identity had been revealed, "it was never truly yours to lose." She stood, and for the first time I saw her as she truly was. Not a secretary or companion, but the rightful heir to Linthill House. The resemblance to Lady Margaret's portrait was unmistakable. "I didn't want to take anything by force," she said, her voice steady and clear as a bell. "I only wanted the truth to be known. Justice for Lady Margaret. Justice for all the women whose voices have been silenced by men who thought power was their birthright." Poirot gave a small elegant bow. "Et voilà. The mystery is solved, the truth revealed, and justice, at long last, is served." There was a commotion in the drive outside, the sound of a motor car and heavy footsteps on gravel. Through the window I could see 2 uniformed constables approaching the front door. "Ah," said Poirot with satisfaction. "I took the precaution of sending word to the local police station this morning. I suspected we might have need of their services before the day was through." But as the constables led Lady Frances and Ian away, I couldn't help but feel that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The past had finally been laid to rest. But the future, Linthill's future, was just beginning. Epilogue: Linthill restored. The legal proceedings that followed were swift if not entirely pleasant. Lady Frances, faced with the evidence of her deception and attempted murder, chose not to contest Eliza's claim. She retired quietly to a small property in Perthshire, her reputation in tatters but her freedom intact. Poirot, in his wisdom, had chosen to focus on the inheritance fraud, rather than the more serious charges. Ian Hume Kerr simply disappeared one night, taking nothing but a single suitcase. Some said he had gone to America, others claimed he had joined the merchant navy. I suspect he simply wanted to become someone else entirely, which, given the circumstances, was perhaps the wisest course available to him. The walking stick, the murder weapon that had killed Lady Margaret, was donated to the local museum as evidence of a centuries-old crime finally solved. It was 3 months later that I returned to Linthill, curious to see what Eliza had made of her unexpected inheritance. I found the house transformed, not renovated exactly, but somehow more alive. The windows were open to let in the sea air, the gardens were being restored, and there was a sense of purpose about the place that had been missing before. Eliza met me at the door, dressed simply but with an air of quiet authority that suited her far better than her former role as secretary. "Captain Hastings," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "How good of you to come. And Monsieur Poirot?" "Tending his orchids in Belgium," I replied. "He sends his regards and his earnest hope that Linthill is finally at peace." "It is," she said simply. "For the first time in centuries, I believe it truly is." She led me through the house, pointing out the changes she had made: a library open to the public twice a week, a small school for local children, repairs to the tenant cottages that had been neglected for decades. "I wanted to be what Lady Margaret intended," she explained as we stood in the drawing room where so much had been revealed. "A place of learning and justice, not merely privilege hoarded behind closed doors." "And the portrait?" I asked, noticing that Lady Margaret's painting now hung in a place of honor above the fireplace. "She's watching over things," Eliza said with quiet satisfaction. "As she always has, as she always will." We walked through the restored gardens where Alan Grant was directing a small crew of workers in planting new roses. He touched his cap respectfully as we passed, but I noticed how his entire countenance brightened when he looked at Eliza. There was something there, a warmth that spoke of far more than mere employer and employee. "Alan has been invaluable," Eliza said, following my gaze with obvious affection. "Not just as a gardener, but as a true partner in this restoration. We're the last of our line in a way. The last descendants of Lady Margaret's true heirs. It seems only fitting that we should restore this place together." "Together?" I asked, raising an eyebrow with deliberate curiosity. She blushed slightly, but her voice was steady. "We've become quite close during the restoration. He proposed last month, actually. We'll marry in the spring, here at Linthill. Lady Margaret would have approved, I think. Two branches of the same family tree reunited after all these years of separation." As we continued our tour, I was struck by how genuinely alive the house felt. Children's laughter echoed from the schoolroom wing, where a young teacher was conducting lessons in reading and arithmetic. The library buzzed with quiet conversation as local scholars examined the newly catalogued historical documents. Even the servants moved with purpose and pride, no longer shadows in their own home. "What of MacLeod?" I asked, remembering the butler who had kept the family secrets for so long. "Still here, naturally," Eliza replied with obvious fondness. "He's become something of a local celebrity since the story came out. Visitors come specifically to hear him tell the tale of how he helped preserve the truth for 40 years. He's writing his memoirs, actually, with considerable assistance from Miss Robertson, our school teacher." We paused at the foot of the great staircase, where fresh flowers still stood in a vase on the newel post. The 13th step had been restored to match the others, but a small brass plaque now marked the spot where Lady Margaret had fallen. "In memory of Lady Margaret Hume, 1720 to 1751, who died defending truth and justice, the light will always find a way." Her final words to her physician, Eliza explained softly. "We found them in Dr. Forbes's complete journal, which turned up in the Edinburgh archives. She knew she was going to die, but she believed, she knew, that the truth would eventually surface. She was right." As evening approached, we gathered in the blue parlor for dinner, a small but convivial party consisting of Eliza, Alan, MacLeod, the school teacher Miss Robertson, and myself. The conversation was lively and warm, full of ambitious plans for the future and gentle reminiscences of the past. "There's something else," Eliza said as we finished our meal, her voice taking on a note of quiet reverence. Something I haven't shared with anyone yet." She reached into her reticule and withdrew a small leather journal. "I found this last week hidden in Lady Margaret's writing desk. It's her private diary from the weeks before her death." She opened it carefully and read aloud. 15th July 1751. "I have made my decision at last. The estate will go to my dear Eliza, not because she is my ward, but because she is my daughter. Born of love, not duty, she represents the future I have dreamed of. A world where women might hold property, pursue learning, and shape their own destinies. Andrew will rage, but justice must prevail over mere tradition." 1st August 1751. "I have hidden the will where only Eliza or her descendants might find it. The key I have given her will unlock more than doors. It will unlock the truth itself, if I do not live to see her inherit. I pray that someday someone will have the courage to seek what has been hidden." 10th August 1751. "Andrew grows more dangerous by the day. I have written to Dr. Forbes, asking him to witness my final testament. If anything happens to me, let it be known that I died defending the principle that birth and breeding matter less than character and courage. My daughter's children, and their children after them, will know their true heritage." The room fell silent as she closed the journal. In the firelight I could see tears glistening in her eyes. "She knew," Eliza whispered. "She knew exactly what would happen, and she prepared for it with such care. Every clue, every hidden document, every cryptic message, it was all planned with meticulous precision. She turned her own murder into a puzzle that would eventually lead to justice." "Rather like Poirot himself," I observed thoughtfully. "She thought several steps ahead of her enemies." "Indeed she did," said MacLeod, speaking for the first time that evening, his weathered voice filled with admiration. "She was a remarkable woman, was Lady Margaret. And if I may say so, miss, you've inherited more than her estate. You've inherited her spirit." As I prepared to leave that evening, I paused at the foot of the great staircase where Lady Margaret had died nearly 3 centuries ago. The wood had been polished to a warm glow, and fresh flowers stood in a vase on the newel post. "She would be proud," I said to Eliza, who had come to see me off. "I hope so," she replied with quiet conviction. "I hope she can finally rest." But as I walked toward the door, I noticed something that made me smile. The turned-down portrait on the mantelpiece, the one Lady Frances had hidden, now stood proudly displayed alongside Lady Margaret's larger portrait. It showed a young woman in 18th-century dress, standing beside the very staircase where we now stood. The resemblance between the two women was unmistakable. "The first Eliza Grant," Eliza explained, following my gaze. "Lady Margaret's daughter. She lived to be 93, you know. Married a good man, raised 6 children, and never forgot where she came from. She passed down the stories, the letters, and most importantly, the belief that truth would eventually triumph. I left Linthill as the sun set over the North Sea, painting the old stone walls golden rose. At the bend in the drive, I turned for one last look at the house. 2 figures stood at the window of the drawing room, silhouetted against the warm light within. Eliza and Alan, watching over their inheritance together. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a third figure between them, a woman in an 18th-century gown with proud bearing and direct gaze. Then the light shifted and I saw only the young couple, their hands intertwined, their faces turned toward the future. The past, it seemed, had finally found its proper place. Lady Margaret Hume could rest at last, knowing that her sacrifice had not been in vain. Justice, though long delayed, had finally come to Linthill House. And somewhere in Belgium, I knew, Hercule Poirot was tending his orchids with the satisfaction of a man who had helped set the world right once more. As the North Sea wind stills over Linthill House, Hercule Poirot's piercing logic has unshackled a legacy from its chains of deceit. Eliza Grant, unmasked as the rightful heir, sees her ancestor's sacrifice vindicated. while the shadows of greed and murder retreat into history. Inspired by the real intrigues of Scottish manors, the affair at Linthill House reminds us that truth, though buried, will always claw its way to light.